When studios defer to the flakier impulses and excesses of DEI and identity politics, it's usually calamitous for ratings and profit. We've seen it in Doctor Who's lowest ratings in 6 decades, Echo being dumped in the January burial ground, the Rings of Power's ratings cratering despite costing $1 billion, and The Acolyte receiving the lowest viewer figures of all the Star Wars shows and being unceremoniously canned after 1 season. Perhaps the most farcical and momentous of these projects is the game Concord, a first-person shooter game published by Sony, which now has the dubious distinction of being the greatest failure in gaming history, in large part because it tried to appeal to an identity-driven, modern audience. Concord was released for PlayStation 5 in August. Sony made a lot of good single-player games. They looked around and saw that superhero comedies were popular and decided on a live service multiplayer game like Overwatch, so they bought Firewalk Studios, pumped it full of money, and bought a lavish building for the devs to work in. It took a ridiculous 8 years to make, and estimates are it cost anything from $100 to $400 million. The developers of Concord were absolutely convinced that a central appeal of their game was going to be the characters. Now, I'm going to show you some of the game's characters, so if you're watching this with your laptop propped on the bench while chopping food for dinner, then I would ask you to place the knife down, lest you flinch and accidentally hurt yourself. And if you're in the subway, headphones on, watching on your phone, I would ask you to be conscious to not exasperatedly yelp and growl out loud lest it disturb those around you. Yes, developers actually thought these characters would stoke enthusiasm among vast swaths of regular people, would not draw incredulous laughter, and would appeal with their gender-bending, body-positive, fugly design. Why wouldn't you want to play a video game as a steampunk Angela Bassett, or a morbidly obese lesbian Beyoncé, or a fat Chris Tucker in a Michael Jackson wig dressed for an alpine skiing vacation? You would have to be brain dead, so prissily conceited about identity politics, or have such a blind spot as to have virtually no visible spot to think this was going to fly. Billy looks for the modern audience. Under the bed, Billy hoped to find a clue to DEI and entertainment. Instead, he only found dust and old toys. Oh bother, maybe the modern audience are hiding better than I thought, Billy mumbled. Undeterred, Billy moved to the couch in the living room. But there, too, only crumbs and a missing sock greeted him. Billy felt a little discouraged, but refused to give up so soon. Next, Billy ventured into the back garden, thinking maybe the modern audience enjoyed outdoor films. But all Billy found were chirping birds and rustling leaves. Why is this so hard? Billy sighed to himself. Then he tried searching the closet, thinking it might hold some secrets to DEI. But only clothes and a forgotten board game stared back at him. Maybe the modern audience doesn't exist, he pondered sadly. He wondered if his search was just a wild goose chase, and that DEI and entertainment wasn't a good idea. We should come up with some new stuff instead of taking existing cool stuff and adding too much DEI to it. And these people actually believed this product was going to have an immense cultural footprint and be a new Star Wars as an entertainment phenomenon. Internally, Concord was referred to as the future of PlayStation. Well, we know how much this game sold on all platforms. They didn't even make back 1% of their money. The CGI trailer was meant to introduce you to the characters and make them endearing, but all it did was come across as a Guardians of the Galaxy knockoff. People didn't like the fact it was yet another first-person shooter and were quickly disengaged from the characters and story. Some held out hope the gameplay might at least be decent and redeem the game. Those hopes were shattered as soon as they realized this was yet another generic team shooter. Some of the gameplay looked fun, but there are already too many of those on the market, and this one looked like the worst of all of them. The developers assessed the feedback they saw in the YouTube and Twitch chat and discounted this as the grumblings of irredeemable, incorrigible, reactionary gamers, and looked ahead to the beta that was launching in July for both PS5 and PC. The reaction was overwhelmingly negative. Day 1 of the open beta, which anyone could join on PC, had 2,388 players. That's it. A few days later, that had sunk to 1,100 people. Not even shills and gaming media outlets could build any enthusiasm among jilted gamers. Folks online decided to start looking at what the developers were liking on Twitter. The lead character designer in Concord was seen promoting and liking tweets that encouraged white people to acknowledge their privilege. When the game launched, they peaked at 660 players. This was the game that had been developed over the course of 8 years, and it was doing worse than an indie game made by one person. Just 2 weeks later, the game was pulled entirely. Ultimately, Sony chose to refund all gamers their $40. Brushing off the criticism, one ex-developer tweeted, I don't really care. It was a huge labor from a lot of insanely talented people making an awesome game. Why would I care about a bunch of talentless hacks hating on it? I'm sure having fun playing it, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. So, who is this modern audience supposed to be? Does it even exist? And could it ever be financially viable? In the minds of the showrunners and game developers, this elusive modern audience forefronts pluralism and diversity in race, gender, and sexuality. Androgyny emphasized to an extent that there are often negligible, even hard to distinguish gender differences, with female characters more tough and stoic, and male characters more histrionic and self-deprecating. That a sassy empowerment and no-nonsense attitude among the female game and show characters is the fantasy side of a broader spirit of nicer inclusivity, an emphasis on identity among players in games, and relatable visibility for viewers of shows. That sexuality is either minimized into a soft celibacy or explored with intense modern preoccupations with identity, gender, and sexual expression, coding, polyamorous, and, if need be, non-conforming authentic personal framing. The marginalized or societally othered deliberately being foregrounded as cool, sassy, robust, and empowered, and an assemblage of identity characteristics such as race, gender, or orientation, often substituting for an assemblage of personality characteristics, as if identity traits themselves added up to a compelling persona. That broader economic and legislative politics are enmeshed with identity politics, and much of this can and should be expressed in entertainment. In trying to appeal to this apparent modern audience in entertainment, showrunners and game developers have taken the attitude that this modern audience is either tentative about giving itself permission to be seen and find its place in spaces they might feel are antagonistic towards them, and can be encouraged to take part and see themselves represented in the content. That the modern audience's emergence into predominance and profitability is inevitable and always just around the corner, and that they, the showrunners, writers, and developers, are fundamentally moral, right, and ideal in their views, and that other people are political. But for all their pretensions to an enlightened higher ground and disparagement of an online toxicity, they are prey to a toxicity of their own, compromising innovation, quality, and commercial appeal. Former gaming journalist Colin Moriarty has alleged the environment at Firewalk Studios was toxic positivity and that the developers weren't allowed to say anything negative about the game. These allegations were corroborated by Ethan Gatch from Kotaku, who took to X and said, "I can corroborate the part about toxic positivity. Some sources I've spoken with blamed a head-in-the-sand mentality, a sense the game would come together because the team was too good to fail." Rather than, or amongst, a supposed emotional strength, is an emotional fragility. Since there are so many self-inserts, or sympathetic inserts into the characterization of such games, when the games are rejected, the developers, at least at some level, feel it as a personal slight, a kind of proxy rejection of them and their world outlook. Latently, it becomes personal. Therefore, they are so snarky and emphatic in their rejection of such critics, and reduction of those critics to a small, troublesome minority of dude bros who ruined the product before it had a proper chance. This year saw examples of DEI and identity politics in entertainment crashing and burning in a spectacle of sanctimony, out-of-touch elitism, and flaky self-indulgence that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the hoped-for modern audience in entertainment has not materialized, and that mandated DEI, contrived efforts to shape or cajole or wear down existing or prospective fan bases in popular culture, or self-willed or community-willed self-inserts has cost millions, even billions of dollars. Well, you know what they say.
Be careful what you wish for. You may get it.